I always knew I was adopted. My parents never hid it from me. In fact, they made it a point to celebrate my gotcha day every year, a tradition that was supposed to make me feel special, chosen, wanted, and for most of my childhood it worked. I felt loved, safe, and part of a family that, while not bound by blood, was bound by something deeper. At least that's what I believed. But as I got older, the questions started to creep in. Why did my birth parents give me up? Did they ever think about me? Did I look like them? Did I have siblings out there somewhere, living a life that could have been mine? My parents answered what they could, but there were gaps in the story, places where the details got fuzzy or the conversation shifted to something else. I learned not to push too hard. I didn't want to seem ungrateful. Still, the curiosity gnawed at me, especially during those quiet moments when I'd catch my reflection in the mirror and wonder whose eyes I had, whose smile. My mom, my adoptive mom, would always say, "You have your own smile, honey. You're uniquely you." But I could see the way she tensed up whenever I brought up my birth parents, the way her voice got just a little too bright, a little too rehearsed. It wasn't until I turned 21 that everything started to unravel. It was a rainy Thursday in March, the kind of day that makes you want to stay in bed and forget the world exists. I was home from college for spring break, and my parents were both at work. I was bored, restless, and decided to do some cleaning in the attic, a place I'd always been told was just storage and full of old junk. I figured I'd find some forgotten Christmas decorations or maybe a box of my childhood toys. Instead, I found a locked wooden chest tucked behind a stack of dusty suitcases. The lock was old and rusted, and after a few minutes of fiddling with it, I managed to pop it open with a hairpin. Inside, there were stacks of papers, old photographs, and a faded blue envelope with my name written on it in careful, looping handwriting. My heart pounded as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter, dated the day I was adopted. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the words were unmistakably meant for me. "Dear Emily," it began, "if you're reading this, it means you've started asking questions. I want you to know that you were never unwanted. You were loved from the very beginning, even if life took us in different directions. I hope one day you'll understand why we made the choices we did." The letter was signed A&M. No last names, no details, just those two initials. I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands, my mind racing with possibilities. Who were A&M? Why had my parents never shown me this letter? What else were they hiding? I dug deeper into the chest, pulling out old adoption papers, hospital records, and a stack of photographs. Most were of me as a baby, but there were a few that stood out. Pictures of a young couple, their faces blurred with age, standing in front of a small white house. The woman had dark hair and kind eyes. The man was tall with a gentle smile. On the back of one photo, in the same looping handwriting, were the words, "Always watching over you." I felt a chill run down my spine. I'd never seen these people before, but something about them felt familiar, like a memory just out of reach. I took the photos and the letter downstairs, my hands shaking. I needed answers. When my parents got home that evening, I was waiting for them at the kitchen table, the letter and photos spread out in front of me. My mom's face went pale the moment she saw them. My dad looked away, his jaw clenched. "Why didn't you ever show me these?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My mom sat down across from me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "We wanted to protect you," she said. "We thought it would be easier if you didn't know too much. We didn't want you to feel torn between two families." "But I am torn," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "I've always wondered where I came from. I deserve to know the truth." My dad finally spoke, his voice rough. "We were scared, Em. Scared that if you found them, you'd leave us behind." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "I just want to know who I am." There was a long silence. Finally, my mom reached across the table and took my hand. "We'll tell you everything we know," she said softly. "But you have to promise us something. Promise you won't let this change how you feel about us." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. Not yet. They told me what they knew, that my birth parents were young, barely out of high school, and not ready to raise a child. That they'd chosen my parents through a private adoption, wanting me to have a better life. That the adoption was closed, but my parents had kept every scrap of information they could find, just in case I ever wanted to search. I listened, absorbing every word, every detail. But the more they told me, the more questions I had. Who were A&M? Where were they now? Did they ever try to find me? That night I lay awake in bed, the letter clutched in my hand. I read it over and over, searching for hidden meanings, clues, anything that might lead me to the people who had given me life. I felt a strange mix of guilt and longing. Guilt for wanting to know more, longing for answers I wasn't sure I'd ever find. The next morning, I made a decision. I was going to find them no matter what it took. I didn't tell my parents right away. I needed time to process everything, to figure out what I was really searching for. Was it closure? Connection? Or just the truth? No matter how messy it might be, I spent the next few days combing through the documents I'd found in the attic, looking for anything that might point me in the right direction. Most of the adoption paperwork was redacted, names and addresses blacked out, but there were a few clues: a hospital name, a city, a date. I started with the hospital, calling the records department and asking if they had any information about a baby girl born on my birthday 21 years ago. The woman on the phone was polite but firm. "I'm sorry, but we can't release that information without proper authorization." I hung up. Frustrated but not surprised, I turned to the internet, searching for adoption registries, support groups, anything that might help. I posted on a few forums, sharing what little I knew, and waited. Days passed with no response. I started to wonder if I was chasing ghosts, if maybe my birth parents didn't want to be found. But then late one night, I got a message from a woman named Linda. She ran a local adoption support group and said she might be able to help. We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop downtown. Linda was warm and welcoming, with a kind smile and a gentle way of asking questions. She listened as I told her my story, showing her the letter and the photos. She studied them carefully, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You know," she said, tapping one of the photos, "this house looks familiar. I think it's on Maple Street, just a few blocks from here." My heart skipped a beat. Could it really be that close? Linda offered to drive me by the house, and I agreed, my nerves jangling with anticipation. The house was exactly as it looked in the photo, small, white, with a blue door and a tidy garden out front. I stared at it, trying to imagine my birth parents standing on that porch holding me as a baby. Linda squeezed my hand. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for," she said. But I knew I had to try. I walked up the path, my legs trembling, and rang the doorbell. A woman answered, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes unmistakably the same as the woman in the photo. She looked at me for a long moment, confusion flickering across her face. "Can I help you?" she asked. My voice shook as I spoke. I think you might be my birth mother." The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible to take back. She stared at me, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Emily?" I nodded, tears streaming down my face. She pulled me into a hug, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I've thought about you every day," she said, her voice breaking. "Every single day." We sat in her living room, the air thick with emotion. She told me her name was Anna, and that she'd never stopped loving me. She explained how hard it had been to give me up, how she and my birth father Michael had agonized over the decision. "We were so young," she said. "We wanted you to have everything we couldn't give you." I listened, my heart aching with a strange mix of gratitude and sadness. Anna showed me more photos. Of her, of Michael, of the life they'd built after I was gone. She told me about the letters she'd written but never sent, the birthdays she'd marked on her calendar, the hope she'd always held on to that one day I'd find her. I asked about Michael, and her face softened. "He lives just a few blocks away," she said. "We're still close. He'd want to meet you if you're ready." I wasn't sure I was ready, but I said yes anyway. Anna called him, her hands shaking, and within minutes he was at the door. He looked just like the man in the photos, tall, gentle, with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He hugged me too, and I felt something shift inside me, a piece of the puzzle clicking into place. We talked for hours, sharing stories, filling in the blanks of each other's lives. They told me about the day I was born, how they'd held me and cried, how they'd chosen my adoptive parents because they seemed kind and loving. "We wanted you to have the best life possible," Michael said. "We never stopped loving you. Not for a second." I told them about my childhood, my parents, the attic, the letter. Anna cried when she saw the letter, tracing the words with her finger. "I wrote this for you," she said softly. "I hoped you'd find it one day." As the sun set, I realized how close they'd always been, just a few blocks away, living their lives, hoping I'd come back to them. I felt a strange sense of peace knowing that I hadn't been abandoned, that I'd been loved from afar. When I finally left that night, Anna hugged me again. "You're always welcome here," she said. "You always have been." The days that followed felt surreal, as if I were living in two worlds at once. On one side, there was the life I'd always known. My adoptive parents, the house I grew up in, the routines and memories that shaped me. On the other, there was this new, fragile connection to Anna and Michael, my birth parents, who had been just out of reach for so long. I found myself drifting between these worlds, trying to make sense of where I belonged. I didn't tell my adoptive parents right away that I'd found Anna and Michael. I needed time to process it all, to figure out how to bridge the gap between my old life and this new chapter. I spent hours walking the neighborhood, replaying every conversation, every detail Anna and Michael had shared. I kept thinking about how close they'd always been, how for years I'd passed by their street without knowing the truth. The thought was both comforting and unsettling. Anna called me every day, sometimes just to say hello, sometimes to share a memory or ask about my life. Michael sent me old photos, stories from his childhood, little pieces of himself that he wanted me to know. They never pressured me, never asked for more than I was ready to give. Instead, they let me set the pace, letting me come to them in my own time. One afternoon, Anna invited me over for dinner. She said she wanted to cook my favorite meal, but of course she didn't know what that was. I told her it was lasagna, and she laughed, promising to make the best lasagna I'd ever tasted. When I arrived, the house was filled with the smell of garlic and tomato sauce, and Anna greeted me with a warm hug. Michael was already there, setting the table, his hands shaking just a little. Dinner was awkward at first. We stumbled over small talk, unsure of what was safe to say, what might hurt or heal. But as the evening went on, the conversation grew easier. Anna asked about my childhood, my favorite books, the things that made me laugh. Michael told stories about his own parents, about the time he broke his arm climbing a tree, about the dog he'd had as a boy. I listened, soaking it all in, feeling the invisible threads that connected us grow stronger. After dinner, Anna brought out a box of old letters and keepsakes. She showed me the first lock of my hair, a tiny hospital bracelet, a faded card with my footprints stamped in blue ink. "We kept everything," she said softly. "We wanted to remember every moment we had with you." I felt tears prick my eyes as I held the bracelet, imagining Anna and Michael as scared, hopeful teenagers, trying to do what was best for me. We talked late into the night, sharing stories and laughter, filling in the gaps of each other's lives. I told them about my adoptive parents, about the attic and the letter, about the years I'd spent wondering who I was. Anna listened, her eyes shining with tears, and Michael squeezed my hand, his grip warm and steady. When I finally left, Anna hugged me tightly. "You're part of our family," she whispered. "You always have been." I walked home under the stars, feeling lighter than I had in years, but as the days passed, the weight of what I'd discovered began to settle in. I knew I couldn't keep this secret from my adoptive parents forever. They deserved to know the truth, to understand what I was going through. One evening, I sat them down in the living room, my heart pounding in my chest. "I found them," I said quietly. "I found Anna and Michael." My mom's face went pale, her eyes filling with tears. My dad looked away, his jaw clenched. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then my mom reached for my hand, her grip trembling. "Are you happy?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "I am, I needed to know. I needed to understand where I came from." My dad finally spoke, his voice rough. "We always knew this day might come. We hoped you'd always feel like you belonged here." I squeezed his hand, my heart aching with love and guilt. "I do belong here. You're my family. But Anna and Michael, they're part of me too." We sat together in silence, the weight of everything unspoken hanging in the air. Finally, my mom wiped her eyes and smiled. "We love you, Emily. That's never going to change." I hugged them both, feeling the pieces of my life slowly coming together. For the first time, I felt whole. Not torn between two families, but connected to both, each one a part of who I was. If you've ever found yourself caught between the chapters of your own story, wondering where you truly belong, or what pieces of your past are still waiting to be discovered, you're not alone. My journey isn't just about adoption. It's about the universal search for identity, for connection, and for the courage to ask the questions that matter. even when the answers are complicated. Here on Family True Tales, we explore stories just like this, real, raw, and sometimes messy, but always rooted in love and hope. Every week, we dive into the moments that shape us, the families we're born into, and the ones we choose along the way. If you felt a spark of recognition in my story, or if you're curious about what comes next, about healing, forgiveness, and the unexpected ways our lives can come full circle, this is a place for you. There's so much more to share, and I'd love for you to be part of this journey. So if you're ready to keep exploring the heart of what makes a family, stick around. Hit subscribe and let's keep finding the truth together, one story at a time.